Power doesn't always shout. Sometimes it enters in silence, with steps that don't echo, with eyes that observe before judging. Keanu Reeves didn't arrive at the palace with cameras, bodyguards, or gold-framed invitations. He only carried a worn envelope, a letter signed by someone who hadn't been seen in public for weeks, and a story no one yet knew. The side entrance to Clarence's house was hidden, flanked by ancient walls, covered by time and indifference. Celebrities didn't go there. The forgotten entered there, assistants, cooks, staff who weren't on the official guest list. And at that moment, it suited Keanu perfectly. With his long dark coat, no tie, no makeup, he walked over the cobblestones like any ordinary man would. But for some, that was already a problem. A royal guard stepped in his path. His voice was as hard as the walls he protected. "Halt!" he barked. Keanu stopped without flinching, with that calm of his that needed no introduction. "I have an invitation," he said, pulling out the envelope with the royal seal. But the guard didn't look at it. He only saw Keanu's boots, his 3-day stubble, and the lack of arrogance that seemed to be a requirement for passing through those doors. "You think we let vagrants into a royal event? This isn't a fan convention. Turn around," he spat with disdain. Keanu didn't respond immediately. He looked through the gate, where golden lights danced over champagne glasses. From inside, laughter echoed, unaware of what was happening outside. "I was invited," Keanu repeated without raising his voice. But the voice that doesn't shout often provokes more. The guard took a step forward. He didn't care about the envelope. He didn't care about the name. What he saw was a man who didn't fit the mold, someone who didn't belong in the glittering theater of British protocol. And in his mind, that was reason enough to turn him away. "Get lost," he hissed coldly, "before I remove you myself." Keanu held his gaze, not in defiance, but with that enigmatic presence that doesn't need to impose itself. Sometimes, another's tranquility is the greatest mirror of one's own insecurities. The guard raised his hand, touching his service baton. It wasn't a symbolic gesture, it was a warning. And at that moment, just as the tension was a thread about to snap, a voice rose behind them, soft, noble, unmistakable. "What's happening here?" The guard turned immediately, and paled. Prince William walked toward them with firm steps. No escorts, no ceremony, just him, in his navy blue suit, his face serene, and a gaze that could dismantle any hierarchy with a single gesture. "This man is trying to enter without authorization," the guard said nervously. William didn't look at him. He looked at Keanu, and smiled. "He's with me." Silence, the kind of silence that weighs more than a sentence. The guard stepped back. He said nothing more. He didn't apologize. He just moved aside as Keanu nodded softly and walked through the gate alongside the future king. Because sometimes, true power isn't shown with shouts, but with recognition. They walked together down a quiet hallway, far from the cameras and flashes waiting at the main entrance. William said nothing for the first few meters, and neither did Keanu. It was one of those pauses laden with meaning, where words are unnecessary, where presence becomes language. Finally, the prince broke the silence. "I apologize for that. Not everyone is trained to recognize worth when it isn't dressed in pomp." Keanu smiled slightly. "No need to apologize. I'm used to it." William looked at him with genuine curiosity. "And yet you still come." "I don't come for them," Keanu replied. "I come for what matters." William nodded. In his eyes, admiration mixed with the weariness of someone also trapped in a structure that didn't always allow for humanity. He led Keanu up a side staircase to a smaller room, away from the noise. Inside, a few guests waited. None wore crowns, but all bore scars. It was a private event, a quiet recognition of the souls who had done good when no one was watching. Former soldiers, anonymous volunteers, women who had saved lives without seeking applause. And among them, Keanu. Not because he was famous, but because he had been there, time and again in silence, when others needed help. Donating without announcing it, supporting families without knowing their names, sitting with terminal patients just to make them laugh. William introduced him without reading a list. He simply said, "He's one of us." And in that throneless room, Keanu was welcomed as an equal. The atmosphere in that room was different. There were no fanfares, no press, no gold-plated trophies, just glances that said, "I've been there too." Hands that had held others when the world was falling apart, and silences that spoke louder than any speech. It was a sanctuary without a church, a temple without altars. There the sacred was compassion. Keanu approached an elderly woman in a wheelchair. Her eyes were bright, her skin weathered by time, and her smile defied the years. He crouched to her level and listened to her story. How she had saved 3 children amid a bombing. how over time, her body had weakened, but her heart hadn't. "Thank you for being here," she told him. Keanu shook his head gently. "Thank you for still being here." That was his way of paying tribute. Farther away, a young man missing a leg recognized him. Not for his fame, but for a night when Keanu had helped him get home after a seizure in a park. He hadn't known who Keanu was then, only that he'd stayed with him until the danger passed. And now, years later, he saw him again, at an event where only those who acted out of kindness, not fame, were invited. William watched them all, with attention, with respect. In that small room, he was just another man, not a prince. And as he watched Keanu interact, he understood something crowns sometimes forget. True leadership doesn't impose, it inspires. "Why do you do it?" William asked when they were alone. Keanu answered without hesitation. "Because a suffering soul is a mirror, and one doesn't ignore their own reflection." William fell silent. That comment from Keanu had touched him deeply. A suffering soul is a mirror. How often had he himself ignored that reflection in the faces of his people, trapped in diplomatic commitments or empty ceremonies? In that moment, the prince didn't see an actor before him. He saw a sage, a man whose greatness needed no stage. Their conversation turned to stories that never made the news. Keanu spoke of a terminally ill child in Canada he'd visited without cameras. William shared how he'd once eavesdropped on veteran stories in a hospital, just to remember why his family was meant to serve, not rule. In that exchange, titles disappeared. What remained were two men sharing something older than royalty: humanity. One of the attendees, a middle-aged woman who volunteered in war zones, approached Keanu and handed him a small wooden cross. It was a symbolic gesture. She said she carried it when she was afraid, and now wanted him to have it. Keanu accepted it respectfully, but instead of keeping it, gave it to William. "It doesn't belong to me. People will listen to you more than to me. But she's already done more than both of us." William held the cross with reverence. That simple act marked him, because symbols, as Jung taught, aren't just objects. They're bridges between the conscious and the eternal. After the event, William insisted on walking Keanu to the exit, this time through the main entrance. Not out of protocol, but because it was the right thing to do. They passed hallways adorned with portraits of past generations, kings, generals, diplomats, men who had commanded respect with swords or treaties. But that night, respect was earned with humility. As they stepped outside, some important guests were still at the gala. Seeing William walk alongside Keanu, their glances turned uneasy. No one expected to see the future king escorting someone dressed in black, with no insignias or lineage. But William, indifferent to their judgment, placed a hand on Keanu's shoulder. "Can I ask you something?" Keanu looked at him with interest. "Go ahead, keep coming. This house needs more men like you." Keanu didn't respond immediately. He just nodded. Sometimes, the firmest promise is made without words. Just before they parted ways, they saw the same guard from earlier, the one who had stopped Keanu. The man stared at them, his expression tense, as if exposed. Keanu, far from humiliating him, approached. He pulled something from his pocket, a small folded sheet, the same invitation letter. He handed it to the guard. "Next time, read it fully." The guard lowered his gaze, not out of fear, out of shame, and Keanu left, not as a star, as a man who understands the soul needs no escorts. In the days that followed, the event didn't make the news. No headlines mentioned Keanu, no articles celebrated his actions, but some attendees began to talk, scattered stories, sporadic testimonies, and so the invisible began to echo. A local journalist picked up one of those stories, not because of Keanu's name, but for the symbolic power of the encounter. The article wasn't about movies or celebrities. It was about a night when dignity overcame prejudice, and when the bravest gesture was staying when pride would have made others leave. William, for his part, sent a handwritten letter. No letterhead, no official seal. It simply said, "Thank you for reminding me of what's essential. Thank you for teaching me without words." Keanu never responded, not out of disregard, but because he knew silence, sometimes, is the only sacred reply. Meanwhile, at a foundation in North London, an anonymous donation arrived to cover treatment for a group of children with rare diseases. No one knew who sent it, but the nurse in charge noticed that, along with the check, came a wooden cross, and a note that read, "Keep doing what you do. You are the true royalty." Jung wrote that the sacred appears in the simplest forms, and there it was, in a cross, in a letter, in a nameless act. Elsewhere in the world, thousands of miles from England, a child with a degenerative illness received a package. Inside was a storybook, a signed DVD, and a handwritten letter. It was from Keanu. No one knew how he'd found the address, but there it was, with simple words, telling the child he wasn't alone. Such things were habitual for him. They didn't trend on social media. They weren't marketing strategies. They were part of a life philosophy Jung would describe as individuation.
the process of becoming fully oneself, connecting the personal with the universal, the human with the archetypal. Keanu didn't live for applause. He lived for moments when he could touch a soul without asking for anything in return. One day, during a fleeting airport interview, someone asked him, "What was your most powerful moment with royalty?" Without hesitation, he replied, "When they let me in through the side door, and I left through the main one." The journalist laughed, thinking it was a joke. But it wasn't, because behind that phrase lay a deeper truth. The soul that doesn't demand recognition is the one most deserving of honor. That was always his way, not changing the world with speeches, but with small invisible acts, unforgettable ones. Unforgettable ones. In the circles of power, where names weigh more than actions, the story of Keanu at Clarence's house began to circulate in whispers. Some looked at him with respect, others with suspicion, but none could deny that, in a single day, he'd done what many fail to achieve in a lifetime: touched the soul of a future king. Without trying to conquer it, William began to change certain things after that. He was seen more often walking among volunteers, listening without recorders. He organized private meetings with people who had no titles, only stories. He even reformed part of the protocol so no one would ever be stopped at a gate for not looking the part. The change was subtle, but real. Because gestures, when genuine, need no publicity. Meanwhile, Keanu continued his life. He filmed a new movie. He visited a children's hospital. He disappeared from the headlines, as he always did. But something within him had been reaffirmed, that every act, no matter how small, leaves a mark. And that sometimes, the door closed in disdain, later opens in reverence. Because what was once rejected for not seeming enough, can end up transforming the world from within. One ordinary day, in an ordinary city, a young maintenance worker walked through an art gallery. It wasn't his usual place. He was there because he'd been given a free ticket after a double shift. In one of the rooms, among forgotten paintings and sculptures, he saw a small photographic exhibit on anonymous acts of kindness. There, in black and white, one image caught his attention: Keanu Reeves and Prince William walking together down a stone hallway. No audience, no press, just them. The caption beneath the photo read, "Greatness needs no witnesses." The young man stood still. He felt something he couldn't explain, as if that moment were a promise that integrity still exists in the world, that the quiet ones matter too, that a single act can ignite hope where light seems to have died. That image needed no explanation, because as Carl Jung said, when a symbol is true, it touches the unconscious of all. And there, between history and humility, the image of two men walking without a word said everything. Days later, William received a discreet note. It wasn't from a minister's office or a foreign ambassador. It came from a children's hospital in Manchester. It was written by an 8-year-old girl who'd received a surprise visit. "Thank you for sending me the movie man who laughs softly and really listens," it said. William smiled. He hadn't sent anyone, but he knew exactly who she meant, because that was Keanu's way, arriving unannounced, touching without noise, leaving without expecting thanks. He decided to do something unusual. He sent his personal secretary, with a small box. Inside was an antique pocket watch that had belonged to his great-grandfather, King George VI. It wasn't a gold jewel or a political trophy. It was a symbol of time, of history, of respect. With a note: "Sometimes time gifts us people we didn't know we needed. Thank you for reminding me what it means to serve." Keanu didn't respond, not out of indifference, out of respect. Because he understood that some gestures only need to be received, not returned. And because, as Jung would say, true encounters between souls don't end with words, but with transformation. That was the last time they crossed paths, not because of conflict, but because both knew the essential had already happened. The invisible had already left its mark. Years later, when cameras focused on William being crowned king, most eyes were drawn to the pomp, the greetings, the official gestures. But only a few noticed something. Inside his jacket, sewn invisibly, was the small wooden cross, the one that had passed through hands of war, tenderness, and humility. No one asked about it. No newspaper reported it. But it was there, and in a hospital on the other side of the world, a child grew up with a storybook that still smelled of ink and hope. In his teens, he became a volunteer, and his first act was sitting beside a lonely old woman, saying nothing, just keeping her company. Someone asked him why he did it. "Because once, someone did it for me," he replied, "and taught me that's what real men do." The echo of a gesture, the chain of a nameless act, the depth of the invisible that touches all. Carl Jung said the soul speaks in symbols, not speeches. And this story, woven from silence, humility, and dignity, was a living symbol that true royalty doesn't always wear a crown.